Anything else? No? Then, without further ado, it's my great... Oh, yes, we're coming up to a sort of anniversary which ties in. Now, people have read the little history there. Talking Stick began on the 14th of February 1990, and I believe the very first speaker on that date was Ken Rees himself. And in fact, Caroline and Amanda, who started it, met at one of Ken's courses. And since that time, Talking Stick went on for 10 years. And on the 15th of March 2000, in other words, practically 12 years ago, it became Secret Chiefs when I took over. So again, 12 years or 22, depending how you look at it, going on. But anyway, throughout that time, Ken has given several most excellent talks here, and we're very, very pleased to have him back. So speaking tonight on, let's get the whole title, Cultivating the Magical Personality, the Contributions of Solo, Partnership and Group Work. Please, very big welcome to Ken Rees.
I'd like to start with a request. I can see some people are in discomfort from the heat in here, as I am myself. So I'm wondering if there are windows which can be opened and are not yet opened, a couple of inches maybe. Some are, some aren't. So obviously if people have been a draft, then that doesn't matter. But a number of people are using the Treadwell's leaflets as fans, but there's better uses for them than that, I'm sure. Maybe just a little bit cooler. Preferably a through draft. Right, this talk is actually in 3 parts, and I want to, for the sake of following me, I'll give you the breakdown. Part 1 is actually on magical space. The second part is particularly on the magical personality, although that theme runs through the whole talk. And also there's a concept I want to introduce to probably many of you called the Lymanscape, the liminal space, which isn't one which is well known. I do want to include that in my introduction to magical space. The third part is the pros and cons of nourishing the magical personality through solo work, partnership work and group work. The first 2 parts are a little abstract, I would say, but please hang on. It's worth hanging on until we get to the concrete part, which is the solo partner group. So, without more ado, to discuss what I mean by the term the magical personality, we need to explore the concept, the allied notion of magical space or temenos, for the development of the magical personality takes place particularly in this arena, whether alone or in the company of others. Magical space is always primarily other, capital O really, and intentional. It's not typically accidental. It is deliberately prepared, consecrated and reinforced to be a reservoir for an amplification of the emotional, physical and spiritual resources used within it. Magical action of whatever kind then should feel more intense and heightened. Of course it may not do so, all sorts of different reasons for that, which we won't go into tonight. I must stress I'm not limiting the concept of the magical personality to a specifically constructed temenos. If magic is a way of life to someone, then the everyday world and the whole of nature serves as the ultimate stage. I mean, that's about the broadest definition we can give. But for the purposes of this talk, I wish to restrict myself to consciously built temple spaces, whether they are externally constructed or internally made within one's psyche. So just to preempt 1 or 2 questions which may otherwise come in the second half, I mean, I'm defining terms in a particular way. So, magical space is thus a place set apart, but again, not necessarily always exteriorized, to facilitate and permit the individual to respond to the universe in symbolic ways, in a manner not easily duplicated, if at all, in other contexts, save certain of the arts, e.g. theatre. These responses can take a myriad of forms depending on tradition, inclination, atmosphere, and so on. They are also, of course, influenced by the attitude and personal disposition and intention of the operator. The space may be constituted through ritual and myth and many other means besides. It's partly a question of one's personal choices, how you construct magical space. Such a closed vehicle then allows the appropriation of numinous experience of mana for all of those present, again, hopefully. Now the circle or the square is a liminal space. It's a space for transformation, a safe hermetic container in which performative action can occur. It is at once hermetically sealed, yet at the same time open to the transcendent, to that which may come in on request or emerge out of the participant's creativity. There is thus created a catalyst and an opportunity for the individual actor to change from one state to another. Indeed, that's the whole point. From his or her everyday personality to a magical personality. The setting up of magical space, both literally and psychologically, builds margins and secures boundaries, encouraging different states of consciousness and of being in the world. Such clear outlines should enhance distinct senses of the self and of identity. Symbols in this space mediate between the physical world and mystical appreciations. Such symbols are condensations of meaning that carry lots of different sorts of interpretation, condensed symbols. These are the sort of symbols typically used by magicians. And they have, or should have, an immediate impact on the practitioner, progressively conditioned by their familiarity. It doesn't all come at once. The space now becomes that area inhabited by the individual when they have a sense of being between the worlds, of interfacing numerous sectors of reality at once, and being able to regularly operate within it to some effect. This is totally bound up with the embodiment of the person through their kinesthetic sense. I had an email from a gentleman called Adrian Harris today. I think some people know him here. And he asked me how to go about teaching at the City Lit, which I've done for years. And he wants to offer a course on the body. If he was so strongly about embodiment, he wants to offer a course on the body, but I do suggest he calls it a different title. He can't just use the body as a title, not for the City Lit. So overall, the drive to create magical space is, for me, and you may want to disagree with this later in the question time, I don't mind, ultimately propelled by a craving for the transcendent, which hopefully can be contacted in the modality of the betwixt and between. The between the worlds motive, therefore, is a place to aim for, to arrive at, and maintain for the duration of the rite, at least where issues of the everyday are left at the threshold. One attempts to get out of conditioned socio-historical time and outside daily habitual identity to the extent that an embryonic magical personality starts to appear. I obviously stress embryonic because one would not expect to jump straight from ordinary everyday personality to the magical personality if you've never tried it before, to say the least. Within magical space, as we know, there are rules and actions which the practitioner must conform to. As such, it is typically erected at a specific time and space. Symbolic ritual actions within it act as rites de passage, promoting inner psychic transformation within the person, which I suggest should be, or will be, incremental, as it builds up the awareness of what it's like to feel as a ritual person, as a personality having a magical personality. We have a meeting of inner and outer worlds, intra and extra perception. Ritual construction, therefore, projects ordinary time into mythical time and profane space into transcendental space. In the process of this projection, participants stand between more than one world. Ritual and or allied methods are the motor of this transfiguration. Ordinary time is suspended and replaced by a flux open to the gods, spirits, demons, or whatever entities one is trying to relate to, connect with. The liminal state is so achieved as a transpersonal condition in which the practitioner is detaching from a mundane identity where a feeling of expansion can emerge. Performative action, either outer, ritual, or inner, e.g. meditation, visualization, and so on, is the motor which projects him or her into magical space via the will, capital W I think for will in that sentence. Such work concomitantly constructs magical space within. So there's the immanence there. And it is through such means that the magical personality may indeed live within the everyday, to be in this world but not of it. For many, the magical personality carries more reality than the everyday world. Living in this way, the whole of one's life can be seen as ongoingly initiatory. For success at magical space construction, I suggest an ongoing effort be made by practitioners, whether they be masons, magicians, shamans and the like, to recognize and create spaces between those modalities or moments of scenarios still heavy with initiatory import. One then dwells within such, within the Lyman scape, between the worlds of not this and not that. I'll now just pause for a little bit of this, and then I will dwell on the concept of the liminal space and the Lyman scape in case it's not so familiar to everybody. Concept of liminal space is not new. It was developed initially in anthropology, most of all, by Van Gennep, Rita Passage, and then much later by another anthropologist called Victor Turner, particularly in a book called The Ritual Process, but lots of different, The Forest of Symbols, lots of books by him, absolutely excellent. And basically, the Lyman scape, which as far as I know is my own development of Turner's concept, is really that point, which is also a space of its own, and we'll see what's in space in a minute, may be represented as that junction between multiple worlds at the boundary markers and threshold crossings like the forest, the woods, the crossroads, the ford, the mound, dawn and dusk, in fact all, or many at least, betwixt and between states. Hence the Lyman scape is that area between separation, whether it be from the family, the clan, but most particularly for us tonight from one's everyday consciousness, and return to the ordinary. Ideally, it is facilitated by progressive loss of familiar reference points. Therefore, we may find, and do find, trickery and strange events may happen here. John, over there, if you don't mind me referring to, you told me there's a...
You said there'd be no jokes.
This is not a joke. Just because I mentioned you, it's not a joke, honest. Apparently there is a presentation of Houdini at the Peacock Theatre.
There is, yes.
So lots of trickery, I should imagine, there. Let me know if you see it, John. So trickery and strange events may happen within the Lyman scape. One's senses may be both amplified but also distorted. Disorientation may occur by self, sometimes self-induced, and or by others, if you're working in a group, via deliberately used devices, and or the inner and outer environments of the operator may be manipulated so as to convey and raise overall tension. One needs to be excited. Not always, but it's sometimes nice to be excited, isn't it? Through poetry, through music, through dance, through eros, through prophecy. In other words, we are ultimately talking about the Hermetic trance, as drawn up by the great Renaissance healer and magician Marsilio Ficino, who in turn followed Plato and the 4 degrees of furor, or enthusiasm, as then developed by Cornelius Agrippa. Respect for the developing space, the holy ground, is needed as regards the special focus, the special location, and the timing of the event, or the rite within it. On a cosmic level, the parties to the production, because it is a production, if you're on your own it's still a production, the parties to the production become players in a game larger than themselves, or even larger than the culture they inhabit. They become nothing less than part of an enactment written in nature. The Limenscape, therefore, as a kind of entry point and state of mind for the practitioner constructing magical space, is inexact and ill-defined. That's the point of it. Collision, chaos, and depths of disorder become real dangers on the journey from the ordinary to the extraordinary. Such liminal spaces may thus be actively sought as a means of, to quote good old Carlos Castaneda, shifting the assemblage point, for structuring initiatory activity, and where required, actively encouraging transgression. For the Limenscape can be considered time out of time, the non-time of chaos and disorder. Therefore, normal rules, values, and forms of behaviour may be suspended. Inversion, reversion, and opposition can become the order of the day, or perhaps I should say night, depending on the operator's intentions. Our conventional world get turned upside down, and invitations are made to the orgia, the fiesta, saturnalia, lupercalia, all welcomed. The Limenscape therefore facilitates stepping outside of one's normal self via the breaking of taboos, as required, and initial dissolution, maybe. The timeless antithesis of conforming everyday, day-to-day sanity is participated in. The stage is thus set for the development of the magical personality within the alchemical retort. And it is through this concept that we now turn. Actually, all the above, everything I've said is actually rubbish. If the trainee, the individual in the magical space, cannot attain a point of contact between themselves and the other, via e.g. the assumption of God forms, working with intent via spellcraft, results magic, becoming party to a specific current, and so on. If they can't do that, they need to begin again. In addition, and to me this is very important, and it's something which I think tends to be ignored in, I think, quite a lot of literature on magic, basically. I may be wrong, so let me know if you know authors who do touch on this point well. In addition, and inextricably involved, is the nature of the energies within oneself. These are always changing with the seasons, one's health, the aging process, suffering from grief, depression, menstruation, and much else which may be cyclical, it may be linear, it may be both or neither, or even spiral or something else altogether. Awareness of such energetics must be taken into account, and may, of course, esoterically speaking, be identified and expressed through the various esoteric vocabularies of mythology, astrology, Kabbalah, Hermetics, and of course the various psychological vocabularies as well. It doesn't matter though. Interpreted or not, they inevitably move us, or sometimes stop us from moving. These energies can be harnessed through, among other things, the power of one's magical name, or names, and the many and varied identifications in solo, pair bond, or group situations, e.g. those groups that have an outer name and an inner name, for instance. These energies, inevitably, because we are alive, are always on stream, as it were, but may be more evident at one part of the day, month or year than in another part, as well as individually varying according to personal physiology, neurology, libido, and hormonal function. Nor must gender differences be forgotten, obviously not. Direction, force, intensity, and duration of such energies obviously shift according to these variables, but they are capable of measurement, at least subjectively. In my view, the magical personality is not developed to any great extent by what can be termed one-off experiences, such as, for instance, a Gnostic Mass, or even successive initiations, e.g. through an order like the OTO. These events can indeed act as doorways, and I believe really ideally should act as doorways, but anyone who's pursuing developing a magical personality must also place him or herself under a rule, a discipline, an order, that's with a small O, not a big O, or otherwise have one thrust upon him or her. In a sense, I'm talking about surrendering to something above and beyond the ego is essential. Whether this is called one's holy guardian angel, the higher self, weird, that's WYRD, the archetypes or whatever, I suggest to do less is to open oneself to the perils of mythic inflation. Such a surrender to my mind implies an acknowledgement of the transcendent in magic and should not at all be confused with the giving away of one's power to one's magical partner, if one has one, any group process, if one's in one, or to the group's facilitators, hierophants, or whoever. Training is therefore essential for the flowering of the magical personality, both within a particular tradition, which will help shape its otherworldly experiences, and this is a key point, perpetual self-reflection, so far as this is possible and convenient to do so. If you like, an ongoing self-psychoanalysis. Magical diary is a start, dream diary is a start, but I'm suggesting something a bit more radical than that, actually doing your own psychoanalysis on yourself, particularly if you're doing this kind of work. Such self-reflection or deep exploration of the self encourages the accruing of power, the ability to channel and use the powerful forces of the cosmos, inner and outer, which should also be a process of healing the self. The training should necessitate working with a whole range of god and goddesses forms and or the Sephiroth, angels or demons as desired, in order to induce and utilize the energies in forming one's differing subpersonalities, as a therapy like psychosynthesis would call it. The practice of magic, therefore, like role-playing or fantasy games, more generally, can provide for the acquisition or evacuation, I mean digging up as an archaeology, of additional, alternative or complementary selves or dimensions to one's psyche. If one wishes to work with the energies informing these different subpersonalities, then the need to ensure that they adequately cohere collectively into an integrated magical personality is paramount. Otherwise, one could even finish up schizophrenic, psychotic. It is to the question of what is the most valuable soil for the cultivation of such integration of the magical personality that we now turn to. And this is where we get more concrete. I want to examine in what ways working on one's own, working with a partner, and working in a group can enhance the process of developing the magical personality in an integrated way, and in what ways each of those modes can actually impede the process, that is, the advantages and disadvantages of each modality. Okay, we'll start off with solo. Seems a good place to start. Well, one model, although one doesn't have to talk about models here, but I think they're quite useful. One model for this can be the cunning folk tradition from traditional witchcraft. This has been updated by various more recent writers within witchcraft traditions. So you've got writers like Scott Cunningham, Raymond Buckland, Ray Beth, Doreen Valiente, Marion Green. They've all provided some interesting texts in terms of solitary work within the witchcraft tradition. However, it's the solitary magician that's probably the most well-known individual role model for working on one's own. The advantages, I suggest, are many. There's no institutionalization, and everything that goes with that, e.g. no administration, apart from what one does oneself. There's no fees unless you want to charge yourself. There's no hierarchy because you're always going to be top dog. And there is no boss. Sounds good. There's no one around to tell you what to do unless you keep a cat. One has almost complete freedom in any direction. One can take and has to take full responsibility for one's own development. One can be spontaneous and creative. There is no one else to fall out with. That's handy. But oneself. It is easy, if you want, to keep a low profile and avoid the fighting, sometimes infighting, sometimes found in groups. But the disadvantages are equally numerous in my view. First and foremost, there is no one to mirror you. Social mirroring. There is no significant other in the social sense. There is thus no social or psychological feedback or reflection, no sounding board as to whether one is actually doing it right, in inverted commas, or not. Without such, how can one be sure what one is doing is correct, effective, and even safe? Proceeding by trial and error is all very well, but it can be easy to fool oneself into thinking things have been achieved when they haven't. One may just be on a pretty fantasy trip. I think we all know people who might fit into that category. Thinking that things have actually been achieved when they haven't, and with no check-in mechanism available in terms of anything else. Loneliness may also occur. It can be a very lonely sort of thing, working from home, wherever your home is, as may boredom. It might be difficult to keep up the motivation, so one starts suffering from inertia. And how can one measure one's own progress when working in a vacuum? Both delusion and illusion are pedals with the solitary grey. So it's balance, really, checks and balances. Right. Magical partnerships are a little bit more complicated because, as we know, there's different sorts of magical partnership. I'm talking about just two people, by the way, here. Different types of magical partnership. So I'm only going to deal with three. I'm sure you can think of more. Perhaps the most well-known one, both in mythology and real life, is master and apprentice. Less commonly, but still around, mistress and apprentice. I'm not being sexist here, I'm just using that for ease of speech. So here, both mythology and real life furnish us with many examples. Arthur and Merlin, the mentor and the magical son or daughter. Within the occupational field, craft apprentices and initiation or the gaining of one's articles. The advantages of such an arrangement, again, very clear. One-to-one tuition, undivided attention and support, at least one hopes so. Gradual and graded, personalised, incremental progression, supervised by a master adept. Plenty of feedback and mirroring. Someone to look up to and emulate as a role model. It's interesting that the first working, or the main working that the United Grand Lodge of England, for the Freemasons, when they were set up in 1813, said was the main one they wanted to work with. It's actually called emulation, the emulation working. And I think it's no accident that they chose that in terms of emulating one's peers and betters and inverted commas and so on. So the deep sense of satisfaction that a master or a mistress may receive in seeing their student grow is one well known to all teachers in whatever profession. So you can observe growth, nourishment and so on. Now we go on to the dangers. One danger is the apprentice may become nothing but a clone of the teacher. So it's imitation and nothing but imitation. Again, he or she may want to stay in the role of the disciple and not grow, becoming dependent on the teacher and fearing separation, just as some clients in psychotherapy, particularly if it's NHS psychotherapy, get terribly upset when you have your 2 years and the therapist moves on. What do you do then? I met a few like that. So there's a fear of acting on one's own volition. Or the student may rebel against the teacher. This can, of course, sometimes be healthy. It's good to rebel. Indeed, it's a necessary development, but in other cases it means the student leaves off tuition too soon, thinking they know it all, which may often not necessarily be the case at all. On the other side, the teacher may try and take advantage of the student in various ways, including manipulation of thought, emotion, and spirit. The teacher may even become jealous of his child's progress and want to maintain some kind of parent-child dynamic to keep him in their place. Well, this pupil's better than me, for goodness sake. Nor should the possibility of financial exploitation be ruled out, particularly in certain colours. So that's the first type, the master and apprentice. The next one I call equal partners, equal partnership. Examples of this might be a couple who share the same initiatory grade in a specific tradition, a priest and priestess, these are well known, or someone who has been trained up to the same level as his or her mentor and can then take an equal ritual and magical role in the conduct of the temple affairs. Or conversely, we may find two beginners who actually, ironically enough, paradoxically, have the security in their lack of knowledge, if it is shared, and so can only increase their experience by working together. I met people like that. Such a relationship can provide a complementarity of energies, a polarity of energies. Also, one partner may lean towards the theoretical side of the tradition, the other towards practice, so there's many sorts of complementarity actually. A partnership is very helpful when someone is nervous about going it alone, or feels inhibited about joining a group, or indeed cannot find a group. It's very common. It can be exciting to try experimentation within such a connection. One does not have to toe the line to a superior, and quite innovative work can be produced, or at least potentially can be produced. There is a joint shared effort throughout, mutual support and collaboration. Negative aspects lie in the possibility of breakdown, sometimes quite nasty, these can occur. Some kind of divorce process, known as, in essence. Each may want to go off to some other path, and or one person stays only out of a misplaced loyalty to the friendship. There might also be financial implications holding the couple together at the end of the day. Other people, other couples, may only stay together because they're in the public eye of the particular magical community which they serve. They thus cannot easily give up the kudos, or possibly the money, arising out of this. At the same time, a partnership of only two can become very introverted and isolating. They may feel there's no need to explore further, either in terms of practice and tradition, or indeed in social terms. So they wouldn't come here, for instance. Oh, you weren't laughing, Trevor? I haven't. Someone laughed, so I don't know what I say to us a bit. They don't feel there's any point in mixing with others in case they find they have something in common, which is really weird. Thus they could well keep themselves to themselves, shy away from having guests at their workings, get terribly precious about everything they do. And finally, how long do such a state of affairs really stay equal? Is there such a thing as true equality anyway? Ideally, in the case, for instance, of the opposite sexes, the situation should be one of equal but different, and usually is. So the third case, and the last case of the partnership one, I say you can think of more, is particularly equal partnership based on gender solidarity, which of course could have been the point too, but I'm stressing particularly now gender solidarity. This occurs, or should occur, without losing the complementarity of different personalities, gifts and talents. Such a couple, obviously, are particularly well suited to single-sex groupings, men or women's mysteries work, Dianic or gay witchcraft, or congeries. Such a pair can also represent part of the eldership of a particular tradition, the wise old man, wise old woman. Within the men, for instance, within the men's movement in the 1990s, there was a grouping called the Wild Dance, and this was essentially headed up by Richard Olivier, who was Laurence Olivier's son, together with the poet Robert Bly, and this worked to very good effect in their shamanic and mythic workshops. Much earlier, a pagan group known as the Regency, which met only outside in a North London wood, was also headed up by two males, and none the worse for that. But again, there could develop competition between the two individuals and status envy. They may be too much alike, or only keeping together to please each other, when both would progress further apart. Qualities of the absent gender might be lacking, or at least in short supply. I think there's a lot more issues I haven't thought of them. So the last one, and probably the one which is most pertinent to some people here, either at the now or in the past, or maybe in the future, depending where one wants, what ambitions one has, is group working in groups. And as we're all in a group at the moment, it's relevant. So this is probably the most well-known, most talked about, written about, and participated in the whole field of magic. Potentially, I'd argue that the magical personality gains the most input from group process. Often these are the most exciting, the most powerful, and the most rewarding, and obviously the most social. More power can be generated, and it is rewarding to watch and experience the growth of individuals in a group where it occurs, particularly if the whole group is growing. A greater variety of work is often possible than working on one's own or in a partnership, because there are more talents, more interests are made available to the greater number of people, much more input. More activities can be done, e.g. different sorts of dance. Very hard to do certain sorts of dance on your own, or even with two people. A strong sense of identity can be inculcated through a common group name. Group bonding is to be expected in the development of an egregore. New people come into the group over the years can provide a fresh injection of energy and perspective and keep the group from growing staid, assuming they're allowed in the first place. I mean, I know groups that only allow people in once someone's died in the group. I don't know if they're all dead yet, but seems a little bit mean, maybe. There are greater possibilities for ritual drama because more roles can be allocated. As against this, though, ironically, there can be less flexibility and freedom, especially I'm thinking now of the newcomer who obviously has to fit into a pre-existing structure, which in turn can be tightly tied to a tradition and not easily modified. This is what our ancestors did, so this is the way we do it. Tensions and dynamics are going to be magnified in a group context, and it's bad enough with two people, and affect outcomes. The onus is then how these are handled and dealt with, particularly at the people at the top, if there is a top, which there often is in groups, as we'll see. I'm just saying that. The most magic groups have some form of hierarchy, so the leadership models from psychological studies are relevant here. Some of us will know the well-known typology of leadership models of all sorts of groups is authoritarian, autocratic, democratic, or permissive and laissez-faire. Now, the leadership style of a group, I feel, will have a big influence on the kind and the quality of the developing magical personality. It can't help but do that, I don't think. Which style is the most nourishing of leadership styles for the growth of magical personality? Well, I'm not sure we know. I don't know. I don't know. You tell me.
Magical personalities creating sacred space. One thing I would emphasise perhaps is everything's an evolution, everything's a flow.
I'm sorry, Sam, you probably have to start again. Because there's a tremendous buzz at my end. There's a tremendous noise. I don't know what it is.
It's the machines coming there.
No, sorry about that. I couldn't actually hear you.
It's basically about the dynamic of creating a sacred congregation, a communication with others. And I mainly talk about groups now. One of the things is that groups don't stay in one state. As circumstances change, even relationships of the night change, the group itself moves around. And what's your comments on the idea of evolution and flow within the relationships of a group? Magically, talking about it.
I'm not sure I get your question.
Right. At one point, a group could be seen as hierarchical. But as the group, as the ritual or whatever is happening evolves, there may be, the group will move on to another state. Although, instead of being hierarchical, it will become more conscious for that period. How do you feel? It's about the dynamics of group interaction and how, I'm trying to say is that it never fixes it once it moves on. So every group goes through a whole series of processes within even one ritual or one night. How would you comment?
Well, of course, one ritual in one night, that would very much relate to the role play, wouldn't it, and the allocation of roles to the actual ritual drama. But when you say, how do I feel about it, you mean, do I think it's good or bad?
Yeah,
or?
that sort of thing. Your opinions, yeah.
Right, well, I thought sooner or later I'd be pinned down in a way. It depends what you use the word evolution. Now, I think groups can evolve, which you can put a positive value on evolution, and I think many people use the word evolution in that way. I don't know if you are or not. But a group of any kind can also have devolution, so a group can actually be less conducive to, shall we say, personal spiritual growth than it was, say, a year ago. So I think absolutely group dynamics shift, and there's, as you say, an inevitability about that, but I don't necessarily equate evolution with positiveness if it evolves into something which is less enhancing than it was before. Purely in terms of texts, I think feminist witchcraft has to some extent cracked this in a way which non-feminist groups haven't, many of them. And I know it's quite old now, some of her books, but I still think Miriam Semos, Starhawk, has got some very significant things to say about group dynamics, outside the bay of psychologists and psychological studies, of course. So I think that, is this being recorded?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not. Are you?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking on my feet here, or on my bum. I think that the trajectory can be held very tightly in a group, and in some of my experiences, there's too much restraint or constraint, I should say, there's too much constraint for there to be much change either way. So there can be quite a degree of staticness. I don't know if this is helpful in this type of answer or not.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main things is as people get to know each other and evolve their knowledge of all the other people within a group, peerless as partners, so the relationship between each person grows and changes. This can be good, and as you say, it can also be.
Yeah, again, you see, this is perhaps depending on what sort of group we're talking about. I mean, one of the groups I was in before I got thrown out, I take it as a point of positivity that I get thrown out of many groups. I think that's a good sign. It reflects on the group. This was a group which almost didn't allow people to mix socially afterwards. Partly because of the distance they had to travel anyway, and partly there wasn't the space to do so. So that particular exchange didn't happen to any great degree. And I suppose that's one of the reasons I was pleased to get thrown out, because there was a couple of people I wanted to cultivate who were on a higher grade than me, and I was more or less told off by the master for cultivating them, and they were also told off for answering some of my questions when the person who should have been answering my questions was in fact having a baby, or at least his wife was having a baby, so that let him off the hook. So I won't go into any more detail about that. So I think it does depend on the sort of group one's talking about there. Obviously, the sort of group which has a big socialising component, absolutely, there's going to be shifts in the relationship and so on.
Thank you.
But I've no particular preference on that level, because I think both sorts have their merits and demerits, really. And again, as we know, some groups only have a certain life, don't they? They only last for about 2 years and then they stop. And perhaps that's all they need to last for, 2 years. So they've done their job. They've been a vehicle for different people in the group. And the people move on to another group or work on their own or whatever. So it doesn't mean it's a bad group because it's only lasted 2 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, did you have a question?
I was going to ask Ken, you have a preference yourself. The obvious preference would seem to me you enjoy group work. You obviously enjoy being in groups. And is it actually your preference?
You're putting me on the spot as well. Get more and more put on the spot. Can I have a crisp while I think about that? Part of me prefers magical partnerships. But then it depends very much who your partner is. Part of me does prefer groups. It's almost different parts of me preferring different angles, if you like. Because, I mean, I get quite different things from a magical partnership than I do from being in a group. I get rather largely different, because usually if it's a magical partnership, I'm the teacher. Now, but in the past, I was the learner. I had my mentors. Most of whom were male actually. So I think the kind of needs, if you like, being met, my needs being met in a group are going to be usually somewhat different to the needs I'm meeting in a one-to-one. Doesn't mean I don't have a drink in the magical partner, mind you. So I hope that's not evasive. I think that's probably the case.
Thank you. Anyone else?
A slight point, I mean, going back years when I used to do this kind of stuff, there was always this tendency...
Hang on, what kind of stuff? Lectures?
Group
you don't mix in
workings
things
or whatever.
Okay.
There was always a tendency that something had to happen within a group.
Yes.
And quite often nothing did.
Oh dear.
And
No wonder you left groups.
Well, I mean, what's your comments on the fact that groups can work and meet every week, and quite often I felt what somebody else was doing, if they were leading a ritual, felt forced to me.
Forced.
Forced.
Forced,
And
okay.
nothing happened. And I mean, this happens time and time again, it must do.
More like going through the motions, you mean?
Right, because you can't summon down whatever every week.
Well, some people reckon they can.
Well, maybe.
If I was in a group like that, I'd leave.
But it happens. Don't you think? I mean,
Oh yeah, just have would change the group.
yeah.
Doesn't mean all groups are tarred with the same brush, does it?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know how long you were experiencing this, but I mean, I don't think you should beat yourself up about it, and just I don't think you should be put off groups forever because one or two groups they were just doing things mechanically.
Yeah.
Like the technique, if you like, was more important than the spirit. I mean, that can be the case with particularly high magic groups, I think. You know, the old-fashioned paradigms, you know, get it perfectly, everything's got to be absolutely perfect, the right coloured candles, the right time of day, the right coloured robes, the altar's got to be absolutely perfect. Oh, that's 2 inches wrong place, so let's move that over. So it's that sort of mechanical group that knocks out the spirit altogether.
Yeah.
But thankfully I haven't been in many groups,
Yeah.
so I still like the group thing.
I guess another.
I think you'd perhaps be a bit more generous to group experience, particularly in London. There's lots of groups.
Yeah. Perhaps if that in some groups are meeting too frequently and they have to do more and more. If the meetings were spread out more, it would be more special, maybe. Yeah.
More developed.
Yeah.
Wisdom.
Wisdom.
Wisdom would be required to give people space. If you're meeting people once a week, it's pretty much the same, isn't it?
Then once a week is heavy duty for me.
Yeah.
When people expect things to happen and want something to happen,
Mm.
they're in for a big disappointment. That's appointment making, yeah.
Yeah.
It's when you let go and you're not expecting, but when you're open and you let go and you mature. Something, not even something can happen, you can just bless it. Do you know what I mean? Then you can build on something. It's when you push for something, then you wreck it.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Perhaps don't expect too much or
Yeah.
don't expect anything, then something happens.
It's a balancing act. I don't know.
yeah. Let it happen, don't make it happen.
Yeah, experience. Yeah.
I think the sense of humour is also important.
Humour, oh yeah.
Laughter is
Yeah.
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 Indeed. You don't smile.
That's, yeah, also important, I guess, getting that balance between mirth and reverence, as I say. So,
Yeah, mirth and reverence.
yeah. Thanks.
So I'd give it a go. Have a
Yeah.
go if I were you.
Alison, yeah.
Do you have any theories, or can you elaborate as to the changing nature of group work and/or individual magical practices throughout various periods in time, and how the outside culture might affect group work or individual work, or the tendency to one or the other in various things throughout history?
That's a huge question. A history of magic in 2 minutes. Well, I'd like to think the wider culture doesn't affect working work, but I'm not convinced it doesn't. For those of us who remember the 70s or even the 60s and the 80s and the 90s and now these noughties, it's not even noughties anymore.
No, tennies.
Or out of date. I think it's all very well saying you can leave their personality at the threshold, which we're taught to do. But the Thatcher years, John Major, and whoever we've got now, the sixth formers. I think that's bound to influence things, because you step out of the group or the individual practice that you're in, only to go back into the current political and economic climate, which has a huge impact, if only because of the amount of time we spend in it. So yes, but I mean in different ways. It's inevitable. We can never get away from culture. The socio-economic political matrix. I don't think. We'll never fully get away from that. So we have to do things in the face of that culture sometimes to achieve something. So it can be a confrontational, actually. Confrontational work. You're frowning, Mirabai. I always refer to you when you come to my talks. I do.
Do you have a question? Would you like to? Okay.
You didn't have a question last year either.
Or a comment? No.
It's bad eyesight, I frown a lot. I actually do that sometimes. It actually makes me see better.
I don't know if this is the second time I've done this talk, and the first time I did it in Bath at a moot called Omphalos Moot.
Ooh.
And the question time actually lasted longer than the talk. Now, I don't know if that means the talk was better this year and tighter, or if that's just like worse. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm surprised there's not more questions. Perhaps I've tied it up too tightly.
Yeah.
Well, nice question.
Yeah, of course.
Fast enough. It's a bit of an unfair question in a way, but I'd like to know if you're willing to answer it. What's the most memorable magical consciousness experience that you had personally in a group?
That's another personal question.
So you think, I'll never forget that.
In a group. Well, if I define a group sociologically, that's actually two people. But I think I'm too shy to say what it was.
Which made me just to guess.
I'd have to guess, because I'm suddenly overcome by shyness. Some of my best experiences were in the woods, with a group I'd only ever met in the woods. Probably a bit like Wood Spirit, actually. Way back, this Regency group. I mean, they were so good, I wanted to restore it, reinvent it with a different name. Still do, actually. Because a tremendous bonding with nature, tremendous drama, which was a drama which incorporated the earth mysteries in the wood, the actual relationship between you and the different parts of the wood. So there was an extra dimension, and it's not like doing something in the living room. You've actually got the dimension of the wood playing roles. Parts of the wood actually played a role themselves. A particular oak tree, a particular old holly bush, the Halloween dancing ground, as this group called it, the River Styx, which was just a stream, but it was the passage from the land of the living to the land of the dead. So that wasn't just a one-off thing. I mean, that was the whole seasonal cycle. That was important. So the one, I'll just leave you to guess which experiences I'm talking about, which is Shard, although you probably won't get it exactly, thank goodness. But the other experience would be an experience of almost a curse, actually, in a group where this particular group had raised so much dynamic power when the height of the ritual came, which involved, if not a curse, certainly a banishing. It involved one person leaving the circle. The voltage went like that. But that all stands out in my mind, because that was in quite early days. I was more impressionable then, possibly. I can't sing out just the one.
Well, there's some very interesting examples there. Thanks. Yes, Ross.
Brought it to my mind saying that.
So could you speak a bit louder?
Yeah, saying about this work in the woods. It might be an idea if you contacted Katrina about wood spirits, because I think sometimes she's a bit pushed to think of new things to do.
Oh.
And if you had to sort of contact her privately, maybe she, because you're on that web, on that.
I am on your forum, yeah.
Forum.
Yeah, I'm on it.
Why not contact her and come along to it sometime?
Well, you know I've got the disability, so...
Yeah, but yes, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, I've got certain material which perhaps she might find of value, ritual material.
Yeah. No, because she sometimes, as Ross says, looking for ideas or suggestions of things to do, so I'm sure anything you...
Yeah, I can throw some bits and
Sometimes we're
pieces.
stiller than others. Sometimes it's a bit of a, we walk.
I mean,
Quite a lot of the time it's quite slow.
There's no copyright on this material. So.
No. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? No? Then perhaps you'd like to say a few closing words or a, theme or anything, Ken?
Well, thanks for having me, obviously. I mean, I think it is worth reflecting on some of the areas I've covered tonight, because I think it can be, and this might be, so I don't know your name, this might be one of the issues with the group you were in, the groups you were in, that perhaps they took things for granted too much, that, oh, we've done it this way, and they didn't necessarily reflect too much on their practice, or rather they didn't reflect on the outcomes. So there's no one there really appraising them, giving appraisal of the work they did. And the absence of someone like that, then things could get a bit stagnant, I suppose. Perhaps there wasn't enough critical feedback from themselves, not from a guest or a newcomer, but just from themselves. So I think thinking about magical space and them being in such a magical space, and reflecting on the difference, is important. I know it's hard to do so after quite a large amount of wine, but maybe the reflection could be done just before we start opening the bottles again.
Thank you. Then I think that's a nice note to end it on. So thank you again very much, Ken Reid. And I sort of implied it, but I didn't say. But of course, as Ken's been doing courses on many interesting subjects to do with magic, mythology and folklore and so on since, when was it, mid-80s, Ken?
82 now, I'm in my 30th year.
Yeah, 30 years and counting. So if anyone's interested, or I don't know if you've got...
Depending on the style, decisions, depending on the leadership style, decisions will take longer because diverse opinions have to be brought into a consensus without too much of a compromise. Otherwise, individual views can be ridden over roughshod, particularly in terms of the newbies. Again, the very nature of the prevailing model utilised by a group, and again, I'm not just referring this to magical groups now by any means, can foster issues of dependency and indeed codependency. I want to give a definition of codependency which I found in a book by a female psychotherapist called Charlotte Davis Cassell in her excellent book with an excellent title, Women, Sex and Addiction. We may know one or two of those. The book, I mean. The definition, her definition is of codependency: someone whose core identity is underdeveloped and makes a false identity built upon clinging attachments to external sources. E.g., it could be a partner, it could be what one looks like. She's talking about women here, don't forget. Work, could be alcoholism, or indeed rules of a hierarchical group. Those at the top of a large hierarchy may develop a particularly emotional relationship with their members, where they need to have those dependent upon them as a way of holding on to power. No doubt, often because of their own personal insecurities, which they may or may not justify with reference to the ancestors. Some members, in turn, out of a longing for certainty and a search for enlightenment, idealism, etc., attracted to the role of disciple, and effectively may even regress to a childlike state, thus colluding in the needs of the hierarchy. So there's a kind of mutual collusion going on. We'll thus get a mutual dependency, typically arising out of the mutual psychological needs of the participants rather than anything more magical. For instance, matters like initiations, so popular with magical groups of all kinds, can then be used, if such a setup exists in the first place. I'm not saying just in every group, far from it, but something like initiation can certainly be used in manipulative ways to keep down some members and promote others as favourites. Family models of groups so beloved by some Wiccan covens are no better if one suddenly finds oneself in a dysfunctional family. I think some people join groups to get away from the dysfunctional families, only to find them in another one. That's a bit of a pain, isn't it? Practices leading to patterns of dependency, I suggest, need to be guarded against wherever possible. And of course, it's a bit seductive because you suddenly don't realise you're in it till you're in it, because it can all be seductive in all sorts of ways, including this. So I have no. I say it may be easier said than done. Matters may be no better where a collegiate model is more common, as in Masonic groups. So one are colleagues, brotherhood groupings, that's inverted commas for me, of various kinds. The sense of solidarity in such groups may be more apparent than real, and those groups that support old-fashioned magical paradigms are almost always hierarchical, thus typifying top-down power rather than power flowing in a circle or in a spiral, consensual or reciprocal. And most of all, what the good old feminist Starhawk calls the power from within. Things may become even more exacerbated when no or little role rotation is practiced. Then there is a potential disruptive effect of individuals having affairs with others in the lodge. The possibility of witchcraft and gossip, not only vis-a-vis other groups or magical orders, but within the lodge itself. Some individuals may not always lose a sense of themselves as separate entities. This can be perceived psychically as black holes creating energy leakages or interruptions in the sphere of the magical space. No egregore is ever really achieved in such circumstances, particularly if there's a shift in demographic in a group of any reasonable size, there's bound to be to some extent little magical bonding, and in some cases perhaps not even much social bonding. But then you've always got the festive board, at least for the Masons. The reverse of this, well actually it's not the reverse, yeah it is a reverse in a way, is what I call the ritual sandwich. I think some people were eating sandwiches earlier tonight, but this is the ritual sandwich. This is where a disproportionate amount, no one here please take this personally, this is totally an objective account, detached account. This is where there is a disproportionate amount of time spent socialising, I shouldn't be laughing, amongst group members, both before and after the ritual work for the evening. So basically, I mean, you've got the socialising before, you've got the socialising after, and you've got the ritual sort of squeezed in at some point, the ritual sandwich. And here we have the possibility, and often the actuality, I suggest, of the displacement of magical goals by social ones. So I've got nothing against socialising. We'll do some in the break. But one, I think, needs to be aware of that. And then there's the matter of numbers. Again, psychological small group studies suggest around 8 people is the gold standard for many contexts, including therapy groups, academic seminars, tutorial groups, and the like. So I have 22. We mentioned 22, didn't we, earlier tonight? Didn't someone mention
yes, 22 years since the start.
Yeah, the 22, yeah. That's not 23, but 22 for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, in situations where there are more persons than this, depending on which group it is, things may feel cumbersome, clumsy, and even downright uncomfortable. There's deliberately no conclusion to this talk, because I feel it's up to you to make your own conclusions. Particularly you're already working on your own, or in a partnership, or in a group. I don't give a conclusion to something like this.
Thank you very much, Ken Rees. So we'll have a usual break, about 10-15 minutes, and then some questions, if anyone has questions and comments for Ken, and I'm sure we'll have an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. 50 minutes, Trevor.
Do you want your chair back?
50 minutes, Trevor. It's 50. We're not too bad.
How's you, mate? I haven't seen you for ages.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah, shame I couldn't make the other ritual. A lot of running about recently, in a good way, you know. But I can't remember where I was on your
Beginning of February, wasn't it?
Yeah, where was
You just
I?
done the launch.
I think I had. I had.
It's just
and
2
we were
days
just like,
after the...
Yeah. We were just
Oh, don't worry, yeah.
But,
Paul came
do you know
along.
when Deli Ann's